He almost didn't go. Daniel Carter was already in his truck, keys in hand, ready to drive home, when his buddy Marcus grabbed the door and said, "You walk away from this date, I swear I'm never speaking to you again." So he went. And the moment he sat down across from her, the woman looked him dead in the eyes and said 6 words he never expected to hear on a first date. "You'll leave, just like everyone else." No anger, no tears, just a calm, quiet certainty. Like she had lived this story so many times, she already knew how it ended. What happened next changed everything. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss how this one ends. The thing about Daniel Carter was that he was not a complicated man. He woke up at 5:15 every morning, made 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one habit he still hadn't broken after 3 years, packed his daughter's lunch before she was even out of bed, and drove to whatever job site was waiting for him on the east side of Portland. He swung a hammer. He measured twice, cut once. He listened to old country radio on a beat-up Bluetooth speaker that one of his guys had duct-taped to a sawhorse. He came home smelling like sawdust and sweat. He reheated dinner, helped his daughter Lily with math homework she hated, read her 2 chapters of whatever book she was into that week, and then sat alone in the kitchen for exactly 20 minutes with a cold beer before he allowed himself to go to sleep. That was his life. Not glamorous, not exciting, but it was his, and he had built it carefully. The way he built everything, board by board, nail by nail, making sure nothing would fall apart. The falling apart had already happened once. He wasn't going to let it happen again. "You need to get out of this house," Marcus said. It was a Thursday evening, and Marcus Webb had let himself in through the back door, the way he always did. Like Daniel's kitchen was an extension of his own living room. He dropped a 6-pack on the counter, grabbed one for himself without asking, and leaned against the fridge with the look of a man who had already decided something. "I'm in a house," Daniel said without looking up from the invoice he was reviewing. "Just not the one you want me to be in. You know what I mean. Marcus. Danny. Don't. It's been 3 years." The pencil in Daniel's hand stopped moving. The kitchen went quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Lily's music drifting down the hallway from her room. Daniel set the invoice down. He picked up his beer. He took a long, slow drink and stared at the wall, the way a man stares at a wall when he's trying to decide whether the conversation he's about to have is worth having. 3 years since what? He said finally. Since Sarah left? Since the divorce? Since Lily cried every night for 6 months and I had to figure out how to be both parents at once. He looked at Marcus directly now. Which 3 years are we talking about? Marcus didn't flinch. He never did. That was the thing about Marcus. He was one of those men who had known you long enough that your anger didn't scare him anymore. All of them, Marcus said simply. And I'm not saying you haven't done a hell of a job. You have. Lily is great. The business is good. You've kept it all together. He paused. But Danny, you're disappearing. You know that, right? You're just slowly disappearing. Daniel looked down at the invoice. He didn't answer. Because the honest answer was, yes. Marcus's plan, because of course Marcus had a plan, involved a woman named Diane who worked with his wife at a nonprofit downtown, who had a friend. Her name is Norah, Marcus said. She's an illustrator, does book covers, some graphic work, runs her own little studio out of her apartment. She's smart, she's funny, I'm not going on a blind date, Daniel said. It's not a date. It's 2 people getting coffee. That's what a date is, Marcus. She uses a wheelchair, Marcus said. Before I forget to mention that. Daniel looked at him. I'm not mentioning it because it's a big deal, Marcus said quickly. I'm mentioning it because Diane said Norah's had some rough experiences, and she doesn't want anyone showing up and making her feel like, like a project, or like someone's doing her a favor. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Car accident, Marcus continued. Years ago. She's been in the chair since. She's fine. I mean, she's built her whole life. She's good, but she's... He searched for the word. Careful around people, especially guys. Can't imagine why, Daniel said dryly. I know you're not like that. You don't know anything about what she needs. No, Marcus admitted. But I know you, and I think... He stopped, tapped his beer against the counter once. I think you've been holding yourself away from everything that might actually be good for you. And I'm just asking you to sit across from somebody for 45 minutes and drink a cup of coffee. Daniel stared at the kitchen wall again. Down the hall, Lily had turned her music up slightly, something soft and acoustic, the kind of music she had recently decided made her seem more mature. He thought about his daughter growing up in a house where her father had slowly turned into furniture. 1 cup, he said. Marcus grinned. That's all I'm asking. He almost didn't go. He had every intention of going. He even ironed a shirt, an act so unusual that Lily stood in the doorway of his bedroom with her arms crossed and said, Who are you, and what have you done with my dad? It's just coffee, Daniel said, fighting with the collar. You don't iron for coffee, Dad. I iron. Name the last time you ironed something that wasn't a curtain. He didn't answer. She was 12 and already winning arguments the way her mother used to, with that same combination of logic and amusement that made you feel outwitted and appreciated at the same time. Is it a date? Lily asked. It's coffee. Is she nice? I haven't met her yet. Is she pretty? Lily. Is she... Go do your homework. She disappeared down the hallway, and he could hear her laughing all the way to her room. He stood in front of the mirror and looked at himself for a long moment. 44 years old. Gray starting at both temples. Hands that had seen 30,000 hours of construction work. A face that had become, over the past few years, a face that didn't smile easily. Disappearing, Marcus had said. He knotted his collar, grabbed his keys, and walked to the truck. He sat in the driveway for 4 full minutes. Then his phone buzzed. Marcus. Just a single text. Don't you dare. He backed out of the driveway. Café Soleil was one of those Portland places that tried too hard and somehow ended up being exactly right. Too many plants, too many Edison bulbs, a chalkboard menu with words like artisan and single origin written in careful handwriting, and yet inexplicably warm, like walking into someone's living room. Daniel arrived 7 minutes early. He told himself it was because he was always early. He was a contractor. Being late to anything was a professional character flaw. He ordered a black coffee at the counter and took a table near the window, where there was enough space on one side in case... He stopped himself from completing that thought. Just a person, he reminded himself. Just a person having coffee. He checked his phone, checked the door, checked his phone again. She came in at exactly the time they'd agreed. He recognized the fact of her before he recognized anything else. The efficiency of how she moved. The quiet confidence of it. The way the door opened and she came through, and there was nothing uncertain about any part of how she navigated the room. Her wheelchair was dark blue, custom from the look of it, and she moved it with the practiced ease of someone who had stopped thinking about it a long time ago. She had dark hair pulled back loosely, a few strands loose around her face. A gray sweater, paint-stained at one wrist. A detail he noticed because he spent his days looking at things people didn't finish cleaning off themselves. She was looking around the cafe with an expression that was calm but searching, and when her eyes found him, she stopped. Not hesitation, just a beat of assessment. He raised his hand slightly. Not a wave, just an acknowledgement. And she nodded once, the way someone nods when they've confirmed what they suspected, and came to his table. "Daniel," she said, not a question. "Norah." He started to stand out of habit and then stopped himself, not wanting to make it awkward. "Sit down," she said simply, not annoyed, just direct. "It doesn't bother me when people stand. What bothers me is when they stand and then don't know what to do with themselves." He sat. She settled in across from him, set her bag on the edge of the table with a familiarity that made it clear she'd sat in 1,000 different configurations of this and figured out what worked. "Marcus says you build things," she said. "Houses. Renovations mostly. Some commercial. You?" "I draw pictures for other people's stories." "Book covers?" "Covers, interiors, brand stuff. Whatever someone needs visualized." She glanced at his hands on the table. "You've got sawdust on your right forearm, just so you know." He looked down. Sure enough. "I showered," he said. "I believe you." Something in her voice almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The server came. Norah ordered chamomile tea and glanced at the menu once, out of politeness, before clearly already knowing what she wanted. They talked for a few minutes. Easy, surface talk. The kind you have when you're both smart enough to know the first conversation isn't the real conversation. She asked about the job. He asked about her work. She said she preferred editorial illustration because novels gave her room. He said he preferred renovation to new builds because at least you knew where the problems were hiding. She smiled at that. It was a small smile, but it reached her eyes. And then the server brought their drinks, and there was a natural pause. And in that pause, Norah looked at him, really looked at him, with the kind of gaze that made Daniel feel like he was being professionally evaluated. "Can I say something?" she said. "Sure." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Diane means well, and Marcus obviously thinks a lot of you. But I've done this," she paused, chose the word carefully, "situation a few times. And usually it goes one of a few ways." "Okay." "Either the guy is great for an hour and then gradually disappears because he realizes my life is not a Hallmark movie and it's actually pretty complicated. Or the guy decides I'm some kind of project and spends the whole evening making me feel grateful. Or," she stopped. "Or," Daniel said. She looked at him directly. "Or he's genuinely fine with all of it right now. Tonight. With the coffee and the nice conversation. But the first time something is actually inconvenient, a place that isn't accessible, a day when I'm not having a great time, a moment when I need something that isn't easy to give." She set her mug down carefully. "He leaves, like everyone else." The cafe moved around them. Voices, someone laughing at the counter, the hiss of the espresso machine. Daniel held her gaze. He didn't rush to fill the space. He didn't reassure her immediately with some rehearsed line about how he was different. He didn't look uncomfortable or defensive or hurt. He just sat with what she'd said. Like a man who understood that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is let someone's truth land before you respond to it. Then he said, quietly, "Then maybe you should give me the chance to prove you wrong." Norah looked at him. There was something shifting behind her eyes. Not softening exactly, more like recalibrating. The way a carpenter's level bubble moves when you find the flat spot. That's a very smooth thing to say, she said. It's not smooth. It's the truth. He picked up his coffee. I'm not going to promise you I'm some kind of saint. I've got a 12-year-old daughter at home who thinks I don't know what an inside joke is. A job that has me starting at 6 in the morning most days. And I haven't been on a date that felt real in a long time. He paused. I'm not here because I'm trying to prove something to you. I'm here because Marcus wouldn't shut up. And because, honestly, he glanced at the paint on her wrist. I'm curious about the story behind the paint. Norah looked down at her wrist. She had clearly forgotten about it. And then, carefully, unexpectedly, in the most unguarded moment of the entire evening, she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, brief and surprised out of her, and she covered her mouth immediately afterward, like she was slightly embarrassed by it. It's cadmium yellow, she said. I was trying to finish a cover before I came here, and I ran out of time. What's the book? A children's story about a bear who decides he doesn't like honey anymore and has to figure out who he is without the thing everyone expects him to be. Daniel considered this. Heavy subject matter for kids, he said. Kids understand identity crises, Norah said. They just don't have the vocabulary for them yet. He looked at her. She looked at him. And for just a moment, the weight of both of them, the woman who had learned to expect abandonment, the man who had learned to expect emptiness, sat at the same table and did something that felt, against all reasonable expectation, like possibility. He drove home with the radio off. Lily was still awake, which was technically past her bedtime, and she was sitting on the couch with a book held at a perfectly innocent angle that told him immediately she had been watching for his headlights. Coffee lasted 2 hours, she said, not looking up from the book. How would you know how long it lasted? You left at 6:53. It's 9:07. You timed me? I'm observant. She lowered the book. Was she nice? Daniel sat on the arm of the couch. He thought about Norah's laugh, about the cadmium yellow, about a bear who didn't want to be what everyone expected. Yeah, he said. She was. Lily studied him with those sharp eyes. You're going to see her again, she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel looked at his daughter, this person he had built his entire reduced life around, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not excitement, exactly. Something quieter than that. More like a door he'd bricked up slowly over 3 years developing, without warning, the faintest trace of light underneath it. Maybe, he said. Lily went back to her book with a small, satisfied expression. Good, she said simply. You need to stop disappearing. He stared at her. She turned a page. He texted Norah the next morning. Not right away, not at 6 when he first woke up, which would have been too much. Not at noon, which would have felt calculated. He texted her at 9:15, between the morning site check and the materials call, sitting in his truck in a parking lot with a gas station coffee and the October wind moving through the half-open window. The bear who doesn't want honey. Does he figure it out? The reply took 11 minutes. Still in progress, but I think he finds something he likes more. Good ending, Daniel typed. Depends on how you look at it, she replied. Some people think changing what you want is a kind of loss. He stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed, I think it's just being honest. This time the reply took only 2 minutes. That's either very wise or very easy to say. He almost typed, come find out, but he didn't. Because that would have been smooth, and he'd already told her he wasn't smooth. Instead, he typed, Laurelhurst Park on Saturday. There's a bench near the East Pond. "I'll bring iced tea." A long pause, long enough that he set his phone on the passenger seat and told himself not to look at it. His phone buzzed. "What kind?" He smiled. Actually smiled. The real kind, where you feel it in your face and you're slightly surprised by it. "What kind do you want?" he typed back. "Peach," she replied. "If you can find it." He found it. Saturday came cold and bright, the way Portland Octobers could be when they were being generous about it. Daniel got to the bench early, of course he did, and sat with 2 bottles of peach iced tea, sweating gently in the cool air, watching a pair of ducks navigate the edge of the pond, with the complete indifference of animals that have never had to worry about first impressions. He heard her before he saw her, the soft sound of her wheels on the path, steady and unhurried. She came around the bend in the path and stopped when she saw him. "You found Peach," she said. "I found Peach," he confirmed. She came to the bench and positioned herself beside it, not across from it, beside it, the way you sit when you're not sure whether you're staying, but you're open to the idea. He held out the bottle. She took it. They sat with the ducks and the light for a moment without talking. "I almost didn't come," she said finally. "I know," he said. She glanced at him. "How do you know?" "Because I almost didn't either," he said. "And I wanted to." She absorbed this, turned the bottle of tea in her hands. "What made you?" she asked. He thought about Lily's voice. "You need to stop disappearing." "Someone told me I'd been invisible long enough," he said. Norah looked out at the pond. "People have said things like that to me too," she said quietly. "After the accident, you have to get back out there. You have to stop being afraid. Like being afraid was something I was choosing." She paused. "Like I just hadn't found the right motivational speech yet." "That's not what I meant," Daniel said. "I know," she said. And then, more quietly, "I know. That's why I came." The ducks paddled past. The light moved through the trees. And the woman who had spent years waiting for people to leave sat beside a man who had spent years waiting to stop being empty. And neither of them said anything for a while. Because sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that happen in the silence between the words. Sometimes the beginning of something real doesn't announce itself. It just sits beside you on a bench and offers you a bottle of peach iced tea and waits. The Saturdays became a thing before either of them officially decided they would. That was the part Daniel couldn't fully explain to Marcus, when Marcus called him 2 weeks later and asked how the coffee date went, which was technically 3 weeks after the coffee date, because Daniel had not told Marcus anything, which Marcus had interpreted as either a disaster or something worth protecting, and he had finally stopped being patient about it. "We've been meeting at the park," Daniel said. He was in the truck, post-sight, eating a gas station sandwich that deserved better than being eaten in a parking lot. "Saturdays. Laurelhurst." A pause on Marcus's end. "Saturdays," Marcus repeated. "Yeah." "How many Saturdays?" "3." Another pause, longer this time. "Danny," Marcus said slowly, in the voice of a man trying not to make a big deal out of something that was clearly a big deal. "That's not coffee. That's a thing." "It's not a thing. It's a bench and some iced tea." "That's literally what a thing is." "Marcus." "I'm just saying, goodbye, Marcus." He hung up. He sat in the parking lot and finished his sandwich and thought about the way Norah had laughed last Saturday when he'd described the time a subfloor gave out under one of his guys and the man had dropped, perfectly upright, into a basement, still holding his coffee, not a drop spilled. The way her whole face had changed when she laughed, like all the careful architecture of her composure had somewhere else to be. He thought about how that laugh made him feel like a man who had something worth saying. He hadn't felt like that in a long time. He threw away the sandwich wrapper and drove home. The Saturdays continued. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing that made for a good story at a dinner party. They met at the bench. They brought their own drinks, always peach iced tea for her, always black coffee for him, because the man was constitutionally opposed to flavored beverages, and Norah had already accepted this as a character flaw she could work around. They watched the ducks. They talked. They talk the way people talk when they've both been starving for real conversation, and they're trying not to eat too fast. She told him about the accident, not the details of it, not at first, but the shape of it. She'd been 27. A car ran a red light. She'd been on her bike, coming home from a client meeting, her portfolio strapped to her back. The portfolio survived intact. The irony of that had never fully left her. "The first thing I said when I woke up," she told him one Saturday, her tea balanced in her lap, her eyes on the pond, "wasn't about my legs. It was, I asked if my work was okay. The illustrations." "Were they?" "Every single page." She shook her head slightly. "My spine was fractured in 2 places, and I was worried about the watercolors." "That's not crazy," Daniel said. "That's who you are." She looked at him. "Most people say it's a funny story," she said. "Like it's endearing that I cared more about my bag than my body." "It's not funny," Daniel said. "It means that when everything else went sideways, the thing you held on to was your work. The thing that was most you." He paused. "That's not a quirk. That's a spine." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a terrible pun," she said, "given the context. I genuinely didn't mean it that way." "I know," she said, and that small private smile again, the one she seemed to give only when she'd been surprised into it. He told her about Sarah, too. Not everything. Not the cold years at the end. Not the specific night he'd slept on the couch because being in the same room felt like being 2 countries that had stopped trading. But the shape of it. Married young. Good for a few years. Then Lily came, and the marriage got better in all the ways that matter, and worse in all the ways that slowly poison you. And by the time they both admitted it was over, they were more relieved than heartbroken, which was almost worse. The worst part wasn't the divorce, he said. It was Lily. Not that she was hurt, though she was, for a while. But watching her figure out how to hold 2 broken things at once and still function. He picked at the paper label on his coffee cup. "She's tougher than me. She always has been." "How old was she?" 9 when we split. She's 12 now." "Does she know about—" Norah gestured vaguely at the space between them. "That I come to the park on Saturdays? No." He paused. "That something might be different than usual? I think she suspects." "Kids always suspect," Norah said. "They just don't always say so." "She said so," Daniel admitted. Norah raised an eyebrow. "She told me I needed to stop disappearing," he said. Something moved in Norah's expression. Not quite surprise, more like recognition. "Smart kid," she said softly. "The smartest person in my house," he said. "It's a little humbling." Norah laughed, and this time she didn't cover it. He noticed. He didn't say anything about it. He just filed it away, like a measurement worth keeping. By the 5th Saturday, she started bringing her sketchbook. Not to show him, just to have. She'd pull it out while they talked, and let her hand move while her attention stayed in the conversation. The way some people need to do something with their hands to think properly. He found he didn't mind it. It was the most naturally herself he'd ever seen her. Half present, half somewhere inside the drawing, and completely at ease with both. "What are you drawing?" he asked one afternoon. "The ducks," she said, not looking up. He looked at the ducks, then at the sketchbook, angling slightly to see. She tilted it toward him without asking. A small but significant gesture, he thought, for someone who had described her work as the thing most purely herself. The ducks were there, yes, but they were off to one side, almost incidental. The real subject was the light, the way it fell across the water, the way shadows gathered under the bank. It was done in quick pencil lines, confident and loose, and it was somehow more true than a photograph would have been. "You make it look easy," he said. "You make building a house look easy," she said. "It's the same thing." "It's not the same thing." "Why not?" "Because I can teach someone to swing a hammer," he said. "What you're doing," he gestured at the sketch, "that's not teachable. That's just you." She looked at the drawing for a moment. Then she closed the sketchbook. "My first art teacher said I had a gift," she said. "My second one said gifts were just obsessions you hadn't quit yet." She set the book in her lap. "I think they were both right. Which one did you believe more?" She thought about it. "The second one," she said, "because it meant I was in charge of it, not the other way around." He thought about that on the drive home, about how she framed everything, her disability, her work, her history with men, as something she was in charge of, even when the charge she'd taken was to build walls. It wasn't cynicism, exactly. It was precision. She was a woman who had learned to measure very carefully because she'd been hurt by things she hadn't measured properly. He understood that more than he'd expected to. It was the sixth Saturday when things shifted. He arrived at the bench to find her already there, which was new. She was usually 30 seconds behind him, their timing so consistent it had started to feel choreographed. But she was already there, and she was on her phone, and from 30 feet away he could read in the set of her shoulders that the call was not a good one. She hung up as he reached the bench. "Everything okay?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She set her phone in her bag with a careful, controlled movement. "That was my mother," she said. "Ah," said Daniel, who had a mother, and therefore understood the weight that single word could carry. "She wanted to know if I was seeing anyone." Norah folded her hands in her lap. "Someone mentioned to her that I'd been going to the park on Saturdays." "The Diane pipeline," he said. "The Diane pipeline," she confirmed. "My mother is—" She stopped. "She loves me. That's not in question. But since the accident, she loves me the way people love something they're afraid might break. And she doesn't always know how to hide that." Daniel set his coffee down on the bench beside him. "What did you tell her?" he asked. Norah looked at the pond for a moment. "I said I'd been spending time with someone. She asked what he was like. I said—" She stopped again. "I said he wasn't what I expected." Daniel waited. "She asked if that was good," Norah continued. "I said I didn't know yet." "That's honest," Daniel said. "I'm always honest," she said. "It's one of my better qualities, and one of my worst ones, depending on the situation." He almost smiled. "What did she say?" "She said to be careful." Norah's voice went very even for a moment, the verbal equivalent of a face kept neutral. "She always says that. Be careful. Like I don't know the risks better than anyone." "She's scared for you," Daniel said. "She's scared of what happens when it doesn't work." Norah turned to look at him directly. She was there after the accident. Not just the physical recovery. The other stuff. The guys who tried and didn't stay. She watched that. Her jaw tightened slightly. "I don't want her watching it again." "Then don't plan for it to fail," Daniel said quietly. "That's not how it works." "Maybe not. But you're not your mother, and I'm not whoever came before." She studied him, not warmly, with the focused, technical appraisal of someone checking measurements against a blueprint. "You say the right things," she said. Norah, I'm not criticizing you, she said. I'm just noting it. Most men panic when I bring up the history. They get defensive or they overcompensate. You just, she made a gesture. Stay level. I'm a carpenter, he said. Level is the whole job. She looked at him for a beat. That's either very funny, she said, or very sincere. Both, he said. Mostly both. She shook her head, but the tension in her shoulders had released, slowly, the way wood releases under the right amount of warmth. They sat. The ducks came back. She didn't open her sketchbook that day. She just drank her tea and watched the water. And somewhere around the midpoint of the afternoon, she moved an inch or two closer to the bench. A small, almost unconscious shift, until her shoulder was nearly level with his. He didn't move. He didn't make anything of it. He just stayed. It was around the 8th or 9th Saturday that he told her about the house. Not a client's house. His house. The one he'd bought 2 years after the divorce. A 1940s craftsman in the Selwood neighborhood that had good bones and bad everything else. He'd been working on it slowly, the way you work on something you're not in a hurry to finish. Fixing one room, then living with it before touching the next. The kitchen was done. The living room was almost there. The second bathroom was still in pieces. Why didn't you just buy something finished? Norah asked. Because I knew what it could be, he said, and I wanted to be the one who got it there. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my apartment has a wall I've been meaning to repaint for 2 years. What color is it now? This awful beige. The previous tenant must have been emotionally neutral about everything. What color do you want it? Deep green, almost forest. Something that feels like being inside something. He nodded. Good color for a creative space. She glanced at him. You know about color? I know about the relationship between a room and the person who lives in it, he said. Which is most of the job, honestly. The technical stuff is just technical. The hard part is understanding what someone's home needs to feel like. Norah was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. The kind where you could tell someone was storing something away. I have a table, she said after a moment. In the kitchen. One of the legs is starting to give. Every time I roll past it, I think I should get it fixed. And then I think, it's not worth calling someone for. And then I think, I'll fix it, he said. She looked at him immediately. That's not why I mentioned it. I know. I'm not testing you. I know that too. He picked up his coffee. I just don't like unsteady tables. It's a professional failing. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said finally. But only if you let me sketch you working. Why? Because you have the hands of someone who's done something real with his life, she said matter-of-factly. And I want to draw them. He didn't know what to do with that. He felt the back of his neck get warm in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Deal, he said. The next Saturday, instead of the park, he went to her apartment. It was the first time he'd seen where she lived, and the space was immediately and completely her. Bookshelves everywhere. Not decorative, actually used, packed and double-stacked and a little chaotic. Illustrations pinned to a corkboard above her desk, some finished, some in stages. Plants in pots she'd likely had to be strategic about placement for. The cadmium yellow paint had friends on the table near her work area. Naples yellow, burnt sienna, a blue so deep it was almost black. And the wall. The beige wall was exactly as offensive as she'd described. I see the problem, he said. I live with it every day, she said, wheeling past him into the kitchen. Coffee? Sure. He looked at the table. One rear leg, loose at the joint. Common in older furniture. The glue dried out, the wood slightly compressed. He'd need wood glue and a clamp. Maybe 20 minutes. "You got wood glue?" he called. "Under the sink," she called back. "Left cabinet." Of course she had wood glue. He found himself smiling at the cabinet door. He fixed the table. She sketched him while he worked, mostly in silence, except for the scratch of her pencil and the sound of coffee being made in the other room. At one point, he looked up and caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Not quite soft, not quite analytical. Something in between. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said, and looked back down at her sketchbook. He didn't push it. When the table was done and the clamp was in place, and they were sitting with their coffee, she turned the sketchbook toward him. He looked at the drawing. His hands were the center of it, working the joint, pressing the clamp into place. But she'd pulled the whole frame back enough that you could see his face, too. Not idealized, not posed. Just him, concentrating, present. He looked at it for a long time. "You make it look like something," he said finally. "It is something," she said simply. He handed the sketchbook back. She closed it. And for a moment, they just sat in her kitchen with the coffee and the newly steady table and the awful beige wall that was going to be forest green one day. And it felt not romantic. Not yet. Not exactly. But intimate. Like being trusted with a real version of someone's life. Not the performance. The actual rooms. He was almost to the door when she said his name. He turned. She was holding the sketchbook open to the drawing again. She pulled the page out carefully, folded it once, and held it out to him. "Take it," she said. "Norah, that's your work. Take it," she said again. "I want you to have it." He crossed back to her and took the drawing. He unfolded it and looked at it again. His hands, his face, the plain fact of a man fixing something. And then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, looked at her coffee. "You're the first person I've given original work to in 6 years, she said quietly. He didn't respond immediately. He thought about the right thing to say and decided there wasn't one. So instead, he said the true thing. "I'll put it somewhere I can see it," he said. And he meant it. He put it on his refrigerator when he got home that night, held up by a magnet Lily had brought back from a school trip to the coast. Lily came into the kitchen for a glass of water, stopped, looked at the drawing on the fridge, and looked at Daniel. "That's you," she said. "Working," he said. "Who drew it?" He hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "Someone I've been spending time with," he said. Lily studied the drawing for a moment. Then she looked back at him with those 12-year-old eyes that saw too much. "She's good," Lily said. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She is." Lily filled her glass and went back to her room without another word. But he heard her, halfway down the hall, make a small sound. Not a laugh, exactly. More like the quiet, satisfied exhale of someone who has been waiting a long time for something to finally go the right way. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the drawing on his fridge. His hands, his face, the real version of him. He thought about a woman who had handed him something she hadn't handed anyone in 6 years. A woman who had measured him carefully and found something she hadn't expected to find. A woman who had spent years preparing to be left, and who had, so far, been surprised by the fact that he was still here. He thought about how carefully he needed to be now. Not because he was afraid, because she had handed him something fragile, and he was a man who knew what it cost to build something worth keeping. And he understood, in the way that a craftsman understands the difference between doing the job and doing it right, that what was beginning between them deserved every bit of that care. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed, and for the first time in a very long time, the house did not feel empty. The drawing stayed on Daniel's refrigerator through November. He noticed it every morning when he reached for the coffee grounds, and every evening when he came home smelling like construction dust and cold air. And he had a habit now of looking at it the way you look at something that reminds you of a direction. Not a destination, just a direction. A heading you've set yourself toward and are trying to hold. Lily noticed he looked at it. She didn't say anything. She was 12 and strategic about these things. The Saturdays kept coming. November brought rain, the reliable Portland kind that wasn't dramatic but was absolutely committed. And they started alternating between the park bench, because neither of them was willing to give it up entirely, even in the wet, and Norah's apartment, where the table leg held and the beige wall waited, and Daniel had started, without being asked, fixing other small things. A cabinet hinge that caught, a towel bar that had pulled slightly from the wall. Nothing major, just the kind of accumulation of minor dysfunction that a person living alone learns to stop seeing. Norah accepted this with a precise mix of gratitude and resistance that he had come to recognize as her specific form of trust. She never asked him to fix things, but she stopped pretending they weren't broken. "You don't have to do that," she said one afternoon, watching him reattach the bracket under her kitchen shelf. "I know," he said. "I'm not helpless." "I'm aware of that." He tightened the screw. "I'm not doing it because you can't. I'm doing it because it's broken, and I can see it, and it takes me 4 minutes. It bothers you. Loose things bother me professionally. You're not on the clock." "Norah." He looked up at her. "I like fixing things in your house. It makes me feel useful. Let me feel useful." She held his gaze for a moment with that measuring look. "Fine," she said, "but I'm making dinner." He put down the screwdriver. "You cook?" "I cook extremely well," she said, with a conviction that was both completely genuine and slightly combative, as if she'd had to defend this fact before. "I've had a lot of evenings alone to practice." He didn't say anything about the evenings alone part. She made pasta, not the jarred sauce kind, real pasta from scratch, with a bolognese that had been simmering since 2 in the afternoon because, she explained without looking at him, she'd known he would end up staying for dinner and she'd started it early. The admission was so casual and so enormous at the same time that he didn't know what to do with it, except sit at the newly stable kitchen table and eat the best meal he'd had in longer than he could remember. "This is extraordinary," he said. "Don't make a thing of it." "Norah, it's pasta. Eat." He ate, and he thought about a woman who had started cooking for him at 2 in the afternoon because she knew he'd be there, and how that small act of quiet planning was the most intimate thing anyone had done for him in years. They stayed at the table for 2 hours after the food was gone. They talked about her upcoming deadline, a series of interior illustrations for a novel set in New Orleans, which she was struggling with because she'd never been to New Orleans, and the author kept sending her reference photos that she felt were missing the actual texture of the city. He told her about a house he was renovating in Lake Oswego, a client who kept changing her mind about the kitchen, and how he'd learned, after 20 years, that clients who changed their minds about the kitchen were almost never actually talking about the kitchen. "What are they talking about?" Norah asked. "Usually their marriage," he said, "or whatever they think the house is supposed to fix." She tilted her head slightly. "Does it? Fix things?" "Sometimes," he said. "A good space can give people room to be better. But it can't make them want to be." She turned her wine glass slowly on the table. "What made you want to be?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. He thought about it honestly, the way she'd taught him to, by watching how she handled every question like it deserved a real response. "Lily," he said finally. Watching her figure out how to be brave in a life that hadn't been fair to her, I couldn't keep checking out in front of someone who was checking in so completely. Norah nodded slowly, said nothing for a moment. "I didn't have a Lily," she said quietly. "I just had the accident. And the choice between staying angry about it or building a different life inside it." "Which did you choose?" "Both," she said. "For a long time, both at once. I'm still working on the ratio." He looked at her, this woman who had just fed him from scratch, and admitted it freely, and talked about her anger and her art and her rebuilt life with the same plain precision she brought to everything. And he thought, I am completely in trouble here, and I don't mind at all. He drove home at 10:30 and sat in his truck in his own driveway for 3 minutes, just breathing, before going inside. Lily was asleep. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the drawing on the fridge. His hands, his face, the real version. He thought about the ratio of anger and building that Norah was still working on. He thought about his own ratio and realized he hadn't thought about Sarah's leaving in weeks, and that this fact itself felt like a kind of answer. December came, and with it the particular restlessness of the city closing in on itself before the holidays. And it was Marcus, again, always Marcus, who first suggested the outdoor concert. There was a series of them in the Pearl District, a kind of extended weekend market and live music thing that Portland did in early December before the weather turned completely inhospitable. Marcus and Diane were going on a Friday night and said, with the careful casualness of people who had been coordinating this, that there would be room for 2 more if Daniel and a friend wanted to join. Daniel asked Norah. He called her, which he'd taken to doing sometimes instead of texting, because her voice was one of his favorite things, and he hadn't figured out how to say that yet, so he settled for finding reasons to hear it. "Marcus and Diane," Norah said. "Yeah. The Diane who started all of this." "Yes." A pause. "Is this their version of a double date?" "Probably," he admitted. "Marcus is not subtle." "Neither is Diane." Another pause. "Outdoor concert means pavement?" "The whole Pearl is pretty flat. I've been to that block. It's manageable." "You checked," she said. "I checked," he confirmed. Silence on the line, but not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that had become part of their language. "Okay," she said. "But I'm not performing gratitude all evening because Diane arranged our entire romantic life." "Understood," he said. "I'll keep the thank you speech to under 5 minutes." "Daniel." 30 seconds, maximum. "Goodbye," she said, but she was smiling when she said it. He could hear it. Friday night arrived, cold and strung with lights. The kind of evening that was trying very hard to feel festive, and mostly succeeding. Marcus and Diane were already at the corner when Daniel arrived, and they both had the look of people desperately attempting to seem like they weren't watching the street for a specific person. Norah arrived 60 seconds later, and greeted Diane warmly but briefly, the way you greet someone you know well enough to skip the performance. She shook Marcus's hand with a firm, appraising grip that made Marcus visibly recalibrate his expectations of her, which Daniel watched with private satisfaction. The 4 of them moved through the market. Music came from a small stage at the far end of the block. Not a big production, just a guy with a guitar and a woman on cello, playing the kind of originals that sounded like they'd been written in an honest moment. Daniel stayed close to Norah without hovering. He'd learned the geometry of it. When to drift slightly ahead to clear the path, when to stay level, Wind had just let her move. She'd noticed. She hadn't said anything about it, but he'd seen the way some of the tightness left her shoulders on the nights when he got it right. It was going well. It was going well until it wasn't. They'd stopped near the stage to listen to the second song, the four of them standing in a loose cluster, and Daniel had gone with Marcus to find hot drinks from a cart 10 feet away, leaving Norah and Diane for a moment. And when he turned back with 2 cups, he saw the thing that he hadn't been there to prevent. A group of people, 3 men and a woman, mid-30s, slightly drunk on the easy sociability of a Friday night, had paused near Norah. They weren't saying anything to her. They were just looking. The particular looking that people do when they think they're being discreet and aren't. One of the men said something to the others, quietly, and the woman laughed. Not a mean laugh, exactly, but a thoughtless one. The kind of laugh that doesn't know what it costs. Norah saw it. Of course she saw it. She always saw it. She had years of practice reading the room. Her face did a thing he hadn't seen before. Not anger, not hurt, but something older than both of those. Something that had been there long before him, and would likely be there long after. A shutting down, like a storefront lowering its gate. He was back at her side before he'd consciously decided to move. "Here," he said, and handed her the cup. She took it. She didn't look at him right away. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady. That was the worst part of it, he thought, how practiced the steadiness was. The group had already moved on. Diane was talking about something, filling the space with sound the way people do when they've seen something uncomfortable and are trying to paper over it. Marcus was listening. The music kept going. Norah held her cup and watched the stage with an expression of careful neutrality. And Daniel stood beside her and said nothing. Because he had learned, slowly, with some mistakes along the way, that she did not want to be rescued from the experience of being in public. She wanted to live her life in public, fully, without needing a rescue. What she needed was the thing he was doing, which was simply being there. Being next to her. Being utterly and completely unbothered by anything the world thought about the two of them standing side by side. But something had shifted in her. He felt it without being able to name it. Some internal weather change. She was still present. She laughed at something Diane said. She engaged with Marcus's terrible joke about the guitarist's tuning. But there was a fraction of her that had gone somewhere else. Somewhere he couldn't follow. They stayed another hour. The music was good. The night was cold and lit, and the four of them shared a decent evening by most measurable standards. But when he walked her to her car and said goodbye and watched her go, he had the feeling of a man watching something move away from him and not knowing if it would come back. She texted him that night. Short. "I had a good time. Thanks for tonight." He stared at it. It was technically fine. It was technically everything it needed to be. It felt like a door closing. He wrote back, "Me too. Same bench Saturday?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Yeah," she said finally. "Sure." He set his phone down and sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. Saturday came. He was at the bench at 9, 10, 11. She didn't come. He sat with 2 bottles of peach iced tea and watched the ducks and waited until noon, telling himself she was just late. She'd never been late before, not once in all their Saturdays, but people ran behind. Things happened. He drove home and texted, "Hope you're okay. See you next week." She read it. She didn't reply. Sunday passed. He worked, he drove, he came home. He looked at the drawing on the refrigerator. Monday, he texted, "I'm not pushing. Just want to know you're all right." No reply. Tuesday, Lily came home from school and found him at the kitchen table, staring at nothing in particular. And she put her backpack down very carefully and sat across from him and said, in the voice she used when she decided something was serious, "Dad, what happened?" Not a question. He told her. Not everything, not the deep architecture of it, but enough. The concert, the shift, the silence. Lily listened. She didn't interrupt, which was new. When he finished, she said, "Is she scared?" "I think so." "Of what? You? You're not scary." "Thank you, I think." "Dad," she leveled at him, "what's she scared of?" He picked at the edge of the table. "That I'm going to leave." "But you're not." "She doesn't know that yet." Lily looked at him with the frank assessment of someone who had spent 12 years watching her father build things. "Then show her," Lily said. "Not with a text, with something real." He looked at his daughter. "Something she'd keep," Lily added. "Something that can't be unread, or accidentally deleted, or ignored because she's scared." She pushed back from the table and picked up her backpack. "You build things, Dad. Build her something." She went to her room. He sat in the kitchen for another 20 minutes. Then he got up, got his sketchbook, a cheap one he'd bought at a hardware store years ago, to sketch rough layouts for jobs. And he thought about what Norah had given him, the drawing she'd pulled from her own book and folded and handed to him. His hands, his face, the real version. He wasn't an illustrator. His line was rough and unpracticed and nothing like hers. But he drew what he knew: the bench, the east pond, 2 cups of iced tea on the wooden slats between the seats, one left, one right, both waiting. He spent an hour on it. By his standards, it was bad. By any honest standard, it was the drawing of a man who had never learned to draw, but meant every line of it. He drove to her apartment at 7 in the evening. He didn't ring the bell. He didn't text ahead. He folded the drawing, put it in an envelope, the plain white kind from the stack in his kitchen drawer, and he wrote her name on the outside and put it in her mailbox. And then he drove home. He did not text. He did not follow up. He slept better than he expected. The next morning he was on site at 6, framing a wall with his guys, and he thought about her all day the way you think about something you've decided to trust to take its own course. Not without anxiety, but without interference. That night, nothing. The next, nothing. On the 3rd day after the envelope, he came home to find Lily doing homework at the kitchen table, and she looked up when he walked in and said simply, "She texted you." He looked at his phone. 3 words. "I got it." He stood in the kitchen holding his phone. He texted back, "Park, tomorrow morning, 9. He waited. 1 minute. 2. "Okay," she said. He put his phone down. He exhaled. He realized his hands were slightly unsteady, which surprised him. He was a man who used his hands professionally, who trusted them above most things, and they were shaking slightly over a 3-letter text from a woman he'd known for 3 months. He did not tell them to stop. The next morning he was at the bench at 8:45, and the air was cold, and the pond was still, and the ducks were doing what they always did, which was to navigate without ceremony. And he sat with 2 bottles of peach iced tea, and he waited. He heard her before he saw her, and then she came around the bend in the path, and she stopped when she saw him, the way she had on their very first Saturday. And he stood, not because he was trying to make something of it, but because his body had done it before he could decide. and they looked at each other across 20 feet of gravel path in the cold December morning. She came to the bench. She stopped in front of him. She was holding the envelope. She held it up slightly, the way you hold up evidence. "It's terrible," she said. "I know. The bench looks like a door, and the iced tea looks like lab specimens." "I'm aware." "It's the worst drawing I've ever been given." "Objectively," he agreed. She looked down at the envelope, then up at him. And in her eyes, behind all the careful architecture, behind all the measuring and the distance and the years of managing her own expectations downward to protect herself from exactly this kind of moment, in her eyes was something raw and real and terrified and true. "I disappeared," she said, "on purpose." "I know that too," he said. "I needed to see—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened slightly. "I needed to see if you'd—" "I know," he said quietly. No accusation, no hurt in it. Just, "I know." She looked at him. "You're not angry?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you were scared," he said. "And scared people protect themselves the only way they know how." Her hands tightened slightly on the envelope. "I've done this before," she said. "This exact thing. Disappeared on someone to test them. And they always—" She stopped, reset. "Every one of them eventually decided the complication wasn't worth it. That I wasn't—" Another stop. Longer this time. "That I wasn't worth the particular kind of patience it takes." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then I'm not every one of them," he said. "Norah, I'm not here because this is easy. I'm not here because it fits neatly into my life. My life is a 12-year-old and a job site and a half-finished house and about 6 working hours of sleep on a good night." He paused. "I'm here because it's you. Because you're the most honest person I've met in years. And you make me feel like being present means something. And you gave me a drawing of my own hands. And I didn't know how much I needed someone to see me until you did." The cold moved between them. She looked down at the envelope. When she looked back up, her eyes were bright with something she hadn't let fall. "I'm going to disappear again," she said. "Not like this, but I'm still working on the ratio. I told you that." "I know. And there are going to be days when it's hard, when the world is stupid, and I'm exhausted, and I'm not the easy version of myself." "I don't want the easy version," he said. "I want the real one." She was quiet for a very long moment. Then she looked at the 2 bottles of iced tea on the bench between where they were standing. She reached out and picked one up. She held it. "You brought peach," she said, very quietly. "I always bring peach," he said. And something in her, the last tightly held thing, the final careful wall, released. Not all at once, not with any drama, just released. Like a joint that had been holding tension finally settling into place. She sat. He sat. The ducks came back. She twisted the cap off her iced tea and took a drink and looked at the water. And he sat beside her with his terrible drawing somewhere between them and his coffee going cold, and the whole December morning spread out ahead of them, like something neither of them had earned, and both of them, quietly, knew enough to keep. "My mother's going to ask about you again," Norah said finally. "Tell her the carpenter's still here," Daniel said. She turned to look at him. He looked back. For the first time, she didn't look away first. Her mother called on a Tuesday. Norah was in the middle of a deadline. The New Orleans illustrations. 3 panels still unfinished. A client who had started emailing at 7 in the morning with the particular energy of someone who had never tried to make art under pressure. And her phone buzzed on the desk, and she looked at the name and answered it anyway. Because she always answered her mother, even when she shouldn't. Diane says you went to a concert, her mother said. No preamble. Carol Whitman had decided somewhere in her 70s that preamble was a waste of time she no longer had. Diane should mind her business, Norah said. Diane cares about you. Diane has a very expansive definition of minding her own business. She says he was good with you. A pause. At the concert, when those people... Mom, I'm just saying what she said. I know what you're doing. Norah set down her pencil. You're doing the thing where you gather information from all available sources because I don't give you enough. You give me nothing, her mother said plainly. You've been seeing this man for 3 months, and I know his first name and that he builds houses. That's accurate. Norah? His name is Daniel. He's 44. He has a daughter named Lily who is 12 and extremely smart. He drinks black coffee, which I find baffling. He fixed my kitchen table and 2 other things without being asked, and he can't draw to save his life, but he tried. She paused. He's the first person in a very long time who makes me feel like myself instead of like a situation someone is managing. Silence on the other end. Mom, Norah said, I know you're scared. Of course I'm scared. I'm not. Another silence. Longer. You're sure? Her mother asked. Norah looked at the drawing on her corkboard. The terrible bench, the lab specimen iced teas, the envelope she'd pinned up there the morning after the park because she didn't want it in a drawer. And she said, Yeah, I'm sure. Her mother exhaled slowly, the way a woman exhales when she has been holding her breath for a very long time, and is finally, carefully, deciding to let it go. I want to meet him, she said. I know you do. Before summer. Mom, I'm 71, Norah. I don't have the luxury of patience that you young people take for granted. Norah closed her eyes briefly. I'll think about it. That means yes, her mother said, satisfied. I'll make the pot roast. She hung up before Norah could object to the pot roast. Norah looked at the phone for a moment, and then looked back at her unfinished panels and picked up her pencil. But she didn't draw for a while. She just sat in her studio, with the afternoon going gray outside the window, and thought about a man who couldn't draw and always brought peach, and was still, after 3 months of Saturdays and 2 bottles of iced tea and 1 very bad week, still here. She thought, I am going to have to figure out how to hold this without breaking it. She thought, I am going to have to learn to trust something that I cannot control. She picked up her pencil. She started with the hardest panel first. January in Portland was not kind to anyone, but it was particularly unkind to job sites, and Daniel's crew spent the first 2 weeks of the new year fighting the weather the way carpenters always fight weather, by working around it, through it, and occasionally despite it, with the resigned professionalism of people who had made their peace with discomfort a long time ago. Daniel came home most evenings, tired in his bones, the specific exhaustion of a man who had used his body hard all day in the cold. He reheated dinner, he helped Lily with whatever she needed, and he sat in the kitchen with a beer and called Norah. That was new, the evening calls. They had started almost by accident, after the park in December, on a night when she'd texted him about the New Orleans deadline, and he'd called back instead of texting, because she'd sounded in the words like she needed to hear a voice. They'd talked for 40 minutes, and then another 20, and then she'd said she had to sleep, and they'd hung up. And the next evening she'd called him. It became a thing, the way their Saturdays had become a thing. Without announcement, without discussion, just gradually, as true as the morning coffee. They talked about the work. They talked about Lily, who had decided she wanted to learn guitar, and was practicing with the evangelical intensity of someone who had found their calling, which meant the house had taken on a new sonic dimension. They talked about Norah's mother, who had evidently already told Diane about the pot roast meeting, which meant Marcus now knew, which meant it was essentially public record. Marcus is going to offer to come, Daniel said. Diane already offered, Norah said. I told her absolutely not. Good call. I'm not performing my relationship for an audience. Right, just for your mother. That's different, Norah said. My mother has earned it. He turned that over in his mind. What does that mean? She was quiet for a moment. It means she stayed, through all of it. The hospital, the recovery, the years of watching me figure out who I was afterward. She stayed even when I was angry, which I was for a long time at everyone within reach. She paused. She's earned the right to ask about the things that matter to me. Does this matter to you? Daniel asked. He said it plainly, without performance, the way he'd learned to ask her things that deserved a straight answer. A pause on her end. Don't fish, she said. I'm not fishing. I'm asking. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. You know that. I like hearing it. Daniel. I'm serious. I spend a lot of time being solid and not requiring reassurance. Just let me have this one thing. She made a sound that was half exasperated, half fond. A sound he'd come to love, actually, because it meant he'd reached a version of her that wasn't on guard. It matters, she said, significantly. Thank you, he said. Good night, she said. He smiled at the kitchen wall. Good night, Norah. The pot roast meeting happened on a Saturday in late January at Carol Whitman's house in Lake Oswego. A small, well-kept place where every surface held either a plant or a framed piece of Norah's work, and where Carol herself opened the door before they'd finished coming up the path, because she had been waiting since approximately noon, and it was now 4. Daniel had been nervous in a way he hadn't expected. Not social nervous. He was fine with people. Had spent 20 years managing clients and crews and difficult conversations. But specifically nervous in the way you're nervous when something matters enough to be worth being nervous about. Lily had helped him pick a shirt that morning. Not that one, she'd said, pointing at his usual flannel. Something that says you're a person with indoor activities. I have indoor activities. Name one that isn't fixing something. He'd worn a dark blue button-down that Lily had approved with a nod and no further comment. Carol Whitman was a small woman with Norah's eyes and a handshake that was firmer than he'd expected. And she looked at him the way mothers look at the people their children bring home, with love displaced into assessment. Norah says you build houses, she said, leading them into the kitchen. Mostly renovations, he said, bringing old things back. She glanced at him. I like that better than new construction, she said. So do I. Something in her shoulders shifted. Not all the way, but some. The pot roast was extraordinary. Daniel said so and meant it, and Carol looked at him with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had been making pot roast for 50 years and was pleased that it still landed properly. They talked through dinner, carefully at first, then more freely, the way conversations open up when the food is good and the discomfort has somewhere to go. Carol asked about his daughter, and when he talked about Lily, about the guitar, about the math homework, about the look she'd given him the morning he'd ironed a shirt, Carol laughed. The same laugh as Norah's, brief and surprised and genuine. Norah watched her mother and Daniel talk, and she was quiet in a way that he'd come to understand as her most attentive state, taking notes, filing things, deciding. After dinner, while Daniel was helping Carol carry dishes to the kitchen, which Carol had not asked for but accepted without comment, the way you accept something when it tells you something true about a person, Norah sat at the dining room table and looked at the framed illustration on the wall across from her. One of her earliest pieces, from before the accident. A winter forest, bare trees, a single figure walking. She heard her mother say to Daniel in the kitchen, "She doesn't let people in easily." "I know," Daniel said. "She's been hurt." "I know that too."
"I'm not telling you this to scare you off," Carol said. "I'm telling you because she won't tell you herself. She'll let you figure it out and decide for yourself, because that's how she protects herself. She makes you earn the information. But I'm her mother, and I'm telling you directly." A pause. "She is worth every bit of the patience it takes." Silence in the kitchen. "Carol," Daniel said, "I know." Norah looked at the winter figure in the painting. She did not call out to the kitchen. She did not interrupt. She just sat with the fact that two people who loved her were in the other room choosing her, separately and honestly. And she let it be true without deflecting it. It was the hardest thing she'd done in months. It was also the most important. On the drive home, she said, "My mother likes you." "She's good people," he said. "She told you things." "A few." "What did she say?" He kept his eyes on the road. "That you're worth the patience." She looked out the window. "She shouldn't have." "She loves you," he said. And she was right. Norah said nothing for a moment. "What did you say to her?" she asked. "That I knew," he said simply. She turned to look at him. His profile in the dark car, the steady hands on the wheel, the absolute absence of drama in how he said the most important things. "You're going to make this very hard to run from," she said. "That's the general idea," he said. She looked back at the window, and she let herself smile, fully, in the dark, where he couldn't see it, which was the only way she knew to do it yet. The weeks that followed had a different quality than anything before them. Not different in the large, declarative way of a story that's building to something, just different in the way of settling. Like a house after the last nail, when the structure stops shifting and starts simply being what it is. The Saturdays continued, rain and all. The evening calls continued. He came to her apartment on occasional weekday evenings, and she started leaving the second key on the hook by the door, without making an announcement about it. And one afternoon, he let himself in to find her deep inside a deadline. Headphones on, pencil moving, completely inside the work. And he quietly made coffee and fixed the loose window latch she'd mentioned 2 weeks ago, and left a cup on the corner of her desk where she'd see it. She didn't stop drawing, but she reached out and wrapped her hand around the cup without looking up. And he stood there for a moment watching her work. And the feeling in his chest was so enormous and so ordinary at the same time that he didn't know the right word for it. Later, she took off her headphones and turned and said, "You fixed the latch. Weeks ago you mentioned it. You remembered." "I remember things you say," he said, as if this were simple, because to him it was. She looked at him. The afternoon light was fading. The cups of coffee were cold. Paint was on her hands, the way it always was. Cadmium yellow today, some blue. Her eyes were tired from the work and clear from something else. "Stay for dinner," she said. "I have to pick up Lily at 7. "Stay until 6:30. He stayed until 6:25. He was halfway to the door when she said his name. He turned. She had her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking at him with the expression he'd come to know, the one that meant she was about to say something she'd been holding for a while. "I want to meet Lily," she said. He was quiet. "If that's—" she started. "Yes," he said. "Absolutely yes." He stopped. "I just want to do it right. She's been the main thing I've protected in all of this. I want her to be ready." "How do you make a 12-year-old ready?" "You don't," he admitted. "You just tell her the truth and see what she does with it."
Norah nodded. She told you to stop disappearing. She did.
She sounds like she already knows. She's known since the drawing on the fridge, he said. She just hasn't pushed because she's been giving me room to get here in my own time. He shook his head slightly. She's more patient than me. I'd like to meet the person who made you brave enough to show up, Norah said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. Okay, he said. Next Saturday. Both of you. The bench. She nodded once. And then, because she was Norah, she turned back to her work and put her headphones back on, which meant the conversation was over, and also that she was satisfied with how it had ended. He drove to get Lily. In the car, Lily was in the passenger seat scrolling her phone for approximately 30 seconds before she said, without looking up, "You saw her today." "I did." "You have that look." "What look?" "The one where you're trying not to smile because you think it'll make things weird." She put her phone down and looked at him with the full weight of 12 years of watching him. "She's good for you. I can tell from here. You've never met her." "I know. That's what I'm saying." She looked out the windshield. "I want to." He let a beat pass. "Saturday," he said. "The park." Lily absorbed this. She nodded, and then she picked up her phone again and went back to whatever she was doing. But the corner of her mouth had turned up with the small, complete satisfaction of someone whose plan was working exactly as intended. "Don't make it weird," Daniel said. "I'm 12, Lily said. "Not a golden retriever." "Those are not mutually exclusive." "Goodbye, Dad." "I'm driving. You can't goodbye me." She put her headphones on. He drove through the January streets with the heater running and his daughter next to him, and a feeling in his chest he had stopped trying to name because every name he had for it was too small. And he thought about a woman in an apartment, with paint on her hands, and a key on a hook by the door, and a drawing of a bench on her corkboard that he had made badly and she had kept anyway. He thought about the ratio she was still working on. Anger and building, loss and forward motion. He thought about his own ratio, and how it had shifted over these months without him noticing the individual degrees, until one day he'd woken up and realized he was not disappearing anymore, that the house was not empty in the way it had been, that the drawing on the refrigerator had become the kind of thing you stopped seeing because it had simply become part of what home looked like. He thought about Carol saying, "She is worth every bit of the patience it takes." He thought about Nora's voice when she said, "I want to meet the person who made you brave enough to show up." He thought about Saturday and the bench and 2 bottles of peach iced tea and his daughter meeting the woman who had slowly, quietly, irrevocably become the most important person outside of that car. He turned onto his street. The porch light was on at his house. He'd put it on a timer years ago, so there was always a light on when he came home, because he'd decided early in the single father years that a house should look like it was waiting for you. He pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. "Dad," Lily said, taking out her earbuds. "Yeah?" "For what it's worth," she looked at him, "I think she's going to like me." He looked at his daughter. This person he had built his whole reduced life around. This 12-year-old who had told him to stop disappearing, and meant it, and been right. And he said, "I think she already does." Lily considered this and nodded, as if it confirmed something she'd suspected all along, and got out of the car. He sat for one more moment in the driveway. The porch light held the dark at the edge of the step. Inside, everything was waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, waiting felt like the right thing to be doing. Saturday came the way the best Saturdays do. Quietly, without ceremony, just light through the window and the smell of coffee and the particular stillness of a morning that doesn't know yet how important it is. Daniel woke at 5:15 as always,
made 2 cups of coffee, stood in the kitchen and looked at the drawing on the refrigerator. The bench, the iced teas, Norah's original sketch of his hands. And he thought, today. He heard Lily moving in her room earlier than usual. She appeared in the kitchen at 6:45 in her good jacket, which she had not been asked to wear. He looked at her. "What?" she said.
Nothing. I just felt like wearing it. I didn't say anything. You had a face. I always have a face. It's my face. She poured herself orange juice and sat at the table with the careful composure of someone who was absolutely not nervous. "What time are we leaving?" 8:30. "Cool." She drank her juice. "Should I bring anything?" "You don't need to bring anything, Lily." "Should I not talk too much? Because Marcus said I talk too much when I'm nervous, but I don't think I—" "You talked to Marcus about this?" She had the grace to look slightly caught. "He called to ask about the game last week. It came up." "It came up." "Organically." He looked at his daughter, this person who had quietly been running point on his emotional life for the better part of a year, and he felt a fullness in his chest that he had no business feeling at 6:45 on a Saturday morning. "You're going to be fine," he said. "I know I'm going to be fine," she said. "I'm asking about you." He picked up his coffee. "Me too," he said. They got to the park at 8:52. Norah was already there. She was at the bench, their bench, the East Pond bench that had become the fixed point of the last 5 months, with her tea in her lap and her sketchbook open and her eyes on the water. And she looked up when she heard them on the path, and something moved across her face that was too quick and too true to be anything other than what it was. Relief. The relief of someone who had spent so long preparing for people to not show up, that showing up itself had become an act of grace. She looked at Lily. Lily looked at her. For approximately 2 seconds, neither of them said anything, and Daniel stood slightly back and thought, "This is the most important introduction of my adult life, and I have no control over it, which is terrifying, and I am just going to have to trust these 2 people." "You're Lily," Norah said. "You're Norah," Lily said. She glanced at the sketchbook. "Is that the pond?" "It was going to be. I got distracted." "By what?" "Waiting," Norah said plainly. Lily looked at her father with an expression he couldn't fully decode. Appreciation, maybe, for the directness. And then she walked to the bench and sat on the far side of it, the side that left the middle space for the drinks, the space that had always been between Daniel and Norah, and said, "My dad says you draw book covers." "Among other things," Norah said. "What's the most interesting thing you've ever had to draw?" Norah considered this with the seriousness the question deserved. "A map of a city that doesn't exist, for a novel about a woman who keeps dreaming she lives somewhere she's never been." Lily's eyes went slightly wide. "That sounds incredible." "It was the best project I've ever worked on," Norah said. "Hardest, too." "Why hard?" "Because I had to invent everything from nothing. No reference, no photograph to pull from, just the author's description and my own instinct." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Did it feel right when you finished it?" "It felt like I'd been to that city," Norah said quietly. "Like I'd walked the streets." Lily nodded slowly, and then she looked at Daniel, and he saw in her face the verdict. Not performed approval, not polite acceptance, but the genuine, unguarded recognition of someone who has heard something true. She looked back at Norah. "Dad can't draw at all," she said. "I know," Norah said. "He proved it comprehensively." "He told me he drew you a bench." "He did." "Was it terrible?" "The bench looked like a door." Lily closed her eyes briefly in second-hand embarrassment. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," Norah said.
and her voice, when she said it, was the warmest Daniel had ever heard it. "It's the best thing anyone's ever put in my mailbox." Lily looked at her father. He raised his hand slightly as if to say, "I told you." She shook her head, but she was smiling. They stayed at the bench for 2 hours. Lily asked questions the way Lily did everything, thoroughly, without apology, with a genuine curiosity that had no agenda behind it. She asked about the accident not because she was tactless, but because she was 12 and had decided Norah was someone worth knowing. And knowing someone meant asking the real questions. Norah answered directly and without drama, and Lily listened with the focused attention of a person who understood that some stories deserved to be heard without interruption. At one point, Norah opened her sketchbook to a clean page and handed it to Lily with a pencil. "Draw something," she said. "I can't draw either. It's genetic." "Draw something anyway." Lily took the pencil and drew, slowly, a small bird on the corner of the page. It was better than nothing, but not by much. Norah looked at it. "Good instinct on the wing angle," she said seriously. Lily looked at her. "You're being nice."
"I'm being accurate. The wing angle is good. The body is shaped like a potato, but the instinct was right." Lily laughed, and it was the laugh that told Daniel everything. The genuine, undefended laugh of someone who had decided they trusted the person who caused it. He sat on the bench between his daughter and the woman he loved. He had stopped arguing with himself about the word. It was the right word. It was the only word. And he thought, "This is what I was building toward. Not the house, not the business, not the careful, solitary life I had constructed out of the wreckage of everything that broke. This, right here, this bench, these two people, this morning." He had not known he was building toward it, but he had been. Board by board, nail by nail, showing up every Saturday until the structure was sound enough to hold something real. Spring came to Portland the way it always did, reluctantly at first, and then all at once, the trees going from bare to furious green in what felt like a single week, and the pond at Laurelhurst filling with the particular light that only exists in April, low and gold and generous. Their Saturdays had evolved. Sometimes Lily came. Sometimes it was just Daniel and Norah, which had its own different quality, quieter, more interior, the conversations that required the particular privacy of two people who had decided to know each other completely. The evening calls continued. The key on the hook by her door stayed there. He had, without discussion, started keeping a spare jacket at her apartment, because Portland in the shoulder seasons was thermally unpredictable, and he had shown up cold enough times that it became practical. She had a tube of his hand cream in her bathroom. Neither of them mentioned this. He finished the second bathroom in his house in March and sent her a photo. Not because he needed her opinion, but because she was the person he wanted to show things to. She replied, "That tile is perfect. Took me 4 attempts to get it level," he typed back. "Worth it," she said. Things worth doing usually are. He put the phone in his pocket and stood in the finished bathroom and felt the particular satisfaction of a man who had gotten something right. He had started thinking about the ring in February. Not urgently, not with a plan. Just the way you start thinking about the next phase of a house when the bones are solid. Not because you're in a hurry, but because you can see it clearly now, and you know what it needs to be. He hadn't talked to anyone about it. Not Marcus, which would have resulted in a parade. Not Lily, which... Actually, he talked to Lily. He hadn't meant to. She'd found him at the kitchen table on a Wednesday evening with a cup of cold coffee and a look she recognized, and she'd sat down across from him and said, "Talk. I'm thinking about something." "About Norah." "Yeah." She waited. He said, "I want to ask her to marry me."
Lily was quiet for 5 full seconds, which was the longest she'd been quiet in recent memory. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "I mean, yes, obviously. She makes you a real person again." She folded her hands on the table with a composure that was almost unsettling. "What are you scared of?" "That it's too fast." "It's been 8 months." "That she's not ready." "She gave you a key," Lily said. "She introduced you to her mother. She drew you into her work." She paused. "She kept your terrible bench drawing on her corkboard for 5 months, Dad. What does ready look like to you?" He was quiet. "What are you actually scared of?" Lily asked, in the voice she used when she'd already identified the real answer, and was just waiting for him to catch up. He looked at his cold coffee. "That she'll say no," he said. "Not because she doesn't want to, because she's spent so long protecting herself from exactly this kind of permanence that she might not be able to say yes, even if she wants to." Lily absorbed this. She nodded once, slowly. "Then you make it easy to say yes," she said. "You do it the way you do everything. No drama, no pressure, just," she gestured vaguely, "you, being you, which is apparently enough." He looked at his daughter. "When did you get this wise?" he said. "I've always been this wise," she said, standing up. "You just needed to be in the right place to hear it." She picked up his cold coffee and put it in the microwave. "Get her something simple. She doesn't want a production. She wants to know it's real." He got her something simple. A solitaire. Small and clean, and exactly what it was. The jeweler had shown him larger options and more elaborate settings, and he'd said no to all of them, and pointed to the one that looked like a promise instead of a performance. He carried it in his jacket pocket for 3 weeks without a plan. Not because he was stalling. He was certain, as certain as he'd been about anything in 44 years. But because he was waiting for the right moment, and he trusted himself to know it when it came. He was not expecting the sketchbook. It was a Saturday in late April, one of those mornings that Portland offers as an apology for the winter. Warm, clear, the light coming off the pond in long, shallow angles, everything slightly more itself than usual. They were at the bench. Lily was at a friend's house. The iced tea was peach. The coffee was black. They'd been sitting for about an hour in the comfortable silence that had become one of his favorite things about her. The shared quiet of two people who didn't need to fill every moment, who trusted the pauses. Then Norah said, "I want to show you something." She'd brought a specific sketchbook, not her working one, an older one, the brown cover worn at the corners. She opened it to a page near the back and held it toward him. He took it. He looked at the drawing. His breath stopped for just a second. It was him, kneeling, in front of her chair, level with her, looking up at her. His hands extended, something small in them. Her hands reaching down, her face doing the thing it did when she let herself be entirely unguarded. It was not a sketch. It was a finished piece, detailed, fully realized. The kind of work she put days into. The kind of work she said she only gave to things that were most purely herself. He looked at it for a long time. "When did you draw this?" he asked. "February," she said. "Around the 14th, which I told myself was coincidental." "Was it?" "No," she said. He looked at the drawing again. His own hands, rendered by hers, offering something he hadn't offered yet. "Norah," he said. "I know," she said. Her voice was steady in the way it was steady when she was working very hard to hold something in. I know I'm not supposed to draw the ending before it happens. I know it's forward. I know you might not, Norah. I just needed to draw what I wanted, she said. And now her voice had something underneath the steadiness. Something that was not afraid exactly, but was the thing that happens right before you stop being afraid. I needed to see it, because I spent so long not letting myself want things clearly, and I'm trying to do this differently, and so I drew it, and I know that's Norah. She stopped. He closed the sketchbook gently and handed it back to her.
And then he reached into his jacket pocket. She went completely still. He got off the bench, not dramatically, not with choreography, just a man moving to one knee on a gravel park path on a Saturday morning with the ducks on the water and the spring light everywhere. And he was level with her, exactly as she had drawn it, exactly as she had let herself want it in the privacy of a February evening with her pencil and her honest heart. She put her hand over her mouth. He opened the box. "You drew this," he said. "Yes," she whispered. "I've been carrying this for 3 weeks." Her eyes filled. "I want to tell you something first," he said. "Not a speech, just the truth." He held her gaze, this woman who had looked him in the eyes on their first night and told him he would leave like everyone else. This woman who had handed him art she hadn't given anyone in 6 years, who had cooked for him at 2 in the afternoon and left a key on a hook and kept a terrible drawing of a bench on her corkboard, because it meant he was still there. "I don't want a perfect life. I have no interest in perfect. I want Saturdays at this bench, and bad weather on job sites, and your mother's pot roast, and your paint on things that aren't canvases. I want your hard days and your deadlines, and the way you're honest about everything, even when it costs you." He paused. "I want a life where we keep choosing each other, every day. That's all." The tears she'd been holding went quietly, and she didn't wipe them right away, and her hands were not quite steady when she reached out and held his face. "You really can't draw," she said. A sound came out of him that was somewhere between a laugh and an exhale. "I know," he said. "The bench looked like a door." "I'm aware. And I kept it anyway," she said softly. "I kept it because you meant it. Because you can't fake that kind of terrible." Her thumbs were on his jaw. Her eyes were still bright and full. "You showed up, Daniel. Every Saturday. You put something in my mailbox when I was too scared to come to the door. You fixed my table, and you brought peach tea, and you never once made me feel like a situation." She took a breath. "Yes," she said. "The answer is yes." He put the ring on her finger. She looked at it. Then she looked at him, still kneeling, still holding the box. And she laughed. The real laugh, unguarded, undefended, the one she'd stopped covering with her hand. He stood. He sat back beside her on the bench. She tucked herself close against his shoulder, in a way she had only recently allowed herself to do in public. And he put his arm around her, and they sat looking at the pond. The ducks were there. Of course the ducks were there. "Lily knew," she said. "Lily knows everything," he said. "She's going to be insufferable about this." "She already is. It's one of her better qualities." Norah held up her hand and looked at the ring in the morning light, turning it slightly, the way she looked at something she was deciding how to draw, studying its truest angle. "I want to call my mother," she said. "Call her." "She's going to cry." "That seems right." "And then she's going to make another pot roast." "I'm available for pot roast," he said. Norah put her phone down without calling. Not yet. She looked at the water instead, and he felt the whole weight of her beside him. Not a burden, not a complication, not a situation requiring management, but the specific and irreplaceable weight of another person
choosing to be where you are. He thought about the woman who had looked at him across a cafe table 5 months ago and told him he would leave, who had said it with the calm certainty of someone who had lived that story too many times and knew how it ended, who had handed him her fear as plainly as she handed him her art. Here, this is real. Do what you want with it. He thought about a bench and 2 cups of iced tea and a terrible drawing in a plain white envelope. He thought about a key on a hook and a drawing on a refrigerator and a daughter who had told him to stop disappearing and meant it and was right.
He thought about all the small things, the fixed table, the forest green she'd finally painted the wall, the 40-minute phone calls and the morning texts, and the evenings when he'd sat in her kitchen while she worked, and neither of them had needed to say anything because the being there was enough. He thought about how love, when it's real, doesn't arrive like a declaration. It arrives like a habit, like the same bench every Saturday until you can't imagine the week without it. He looked at Norah, his Norah, who was looking at the pond with her ring catching the light and her shoulder warm against his, and he understood completely what he had built. Not a house, not a routine, not a careful, reduced life designed to keep pain out. Something better than that. Something that could hold the weight of 2 people who had both been broken and had both, separately, decided to keep building anyway. Something that had started with a single question on a first night and a quiet answer. Then maybe you should give me the chance to prove you wrong. And had been constructed, board by board, showing up by showing up, into the thing it had always been trying to be. Norah turned to him. "I want to draw today," she said. "This morning. The bench. Both of us." "Right now?" "Right now." She reached for her sketchbook. "Before I forget what it looks like." "You're not going to forget." "I know," she said, opening to a fresh page. "But I want to keep it anyway." And she drew, and he watched her draw. And the morning held still around them, the way mornings will sometimes do when they understand they are part of something that matters. And the ducks moved on the water, and the light came through the April trees. And 2 people who had spent years learning all the wrong lessons about love sat on a bench in a Portland park and started, finally, to learn the right ones. The woman who had believed everyone would leave had been wrong. Not because she hadn't suffered, not because the fear hadn't been earned, not because the world had become suddenly kinder, but because one man had decided on an ordinary October evening over a cup of coffee that she was worth every Saturday, every bottle of peach tea, every mile of showing up. And he had kept deciding it, every single day, until she finally, fully, completely believed she was worth staying for.